So for this session, this is a bit different. You can see that I'm sitting down, but Paul and I are going to walk you through some Android projects and how they work. So to start off, I'm just going to take you through, and this is mostly for people who haven't played with the Android support as it exists yet. I'm going to take you through a quick hello world and then pass you off to Paul, who will take you through a deeper dive of some of his examples that he had in his presentation. So you can see I'm at the project chooser. I've selected Android, and I'm just going to call this hello world and hit create. Going to make this a bit larger to work with. And I'm going to come over here and change the title. Let's make this match the name of my application. Hello world. And I'm going to grab a text field, make that cover the width of the device. And in this text field, I'm going to go ahead and give it a hint and say name. Now, in mobile, using a hint property is more common than having a separate label just because it takes less space, and space is at a premium on mobile. And below the text field, I'm just going to add a button. You can see all of this is just like any other platform in Xojo. It's very easy to use. Go to the inspector, and we'll change this caption to say hi. We'll double-click that to add some code to the pressed event. And we'll toss up a message box. It says, hello, and text field 1.text. And end with an exclamation mark. We'll go ahead and hit run. And that's compiling it. And now the debugger is connecting over to the emulator that we have on the side. And the app has started. You can kind of see it over there. Apologies if you can't, but it says hello world at the top. And then field with name. You can see on Android that the hint text automatically goes to the, well, it's very hard to see because it's tiny. The hint text goes to the top of the edit field when you're in it, or the text field. I'm going to put my name in, Travis, say hi. And there, if you can't read it, it does say hello, Travis. So that was just a really quick walkthrough to show you that Android is really no different from any other platform. Very, very quick and easy to lay out a simple UI and toss up a message box. So now I guess I'll hand to Paul to go through some of his examples that are far more detailed than Hello World.
Try again. All right, how's that? Pretty good? Okay. Saying these are far more detailed might be a bit of a stretch, but they're going to be a bit different. It's exciting. I get to use Travis's laptop. What damage can I cause? All right, so before I jump into some other stuff, I did want to point out a few of the little Android things to pay attention to that are different. You can see here on the build settings, there's a little switch here for build for the Play Store and a little selector here to choose a key store properties file. Obviously you flip that on if you need to build your app in the format that you can submit to the Play Store. Google has, there's two app formats for Android apps. Not really two app formats, but for the Play Store you have to submit a bundle, an AAB file it's called. So flipping that on tells Xojo to build that particular thing. And that allows you to submit it. If that is off, you can still build that'll build what's called an APK, Android application pack. No, it's not a package, it's a file. Actually, it is a package, isn't it? It's a zip. Yeah, it's a zip. But it builds that file. And that file is the one you can sideload if you wanted. So you could just drag that into an emulator. You could put it on your own website for people to download, that sort of thing. But either way, you're going to need to provide a key store properties file that has all the information containing your account ID, password, and to generate the certificate and stuff that's needed. But that's all where that is done there. There is a little drop down here where you can choose where you're debugging to. Right from the get-go with Android, you can debug directly to the emulator, which is great, as Travis mentioned, if you have apparently an ARM Mac. The emulator is really sluggish on an Intel computer, Windows or Mac. I almost always am testing on my actual Android device that's plugged in using USB. It's just significantly faster, and I'm using a several-year-old Android device, but it is still so much faster than the emulator. But you can have multiple, not really multiple emulators, but you can have multiple OSs installed for use with the emulator. So if you want to test an Android 12 or Android 9 or whatever, you can install those and choose from them here. You can even have multiple USB phones connected, and they'll all show up here. So that is pretty handy for testing, and something we only just recently added to iOS. App icon isn't really any different. I don't think shared is either. Something to, yeah, not really. Optimization level's a little bit different because of the way this stuff is built. It's really more of what it's stripping out for symbols and that sort of thing. And then the app class has a few things of note here. Yeah, probably the biggest thing would just be the theme color, which you can see here. Comes with a bunch of built-in material themes, and there's also a custom option that you can select where you can pick your own theme colors for primary, the dark color, and the title bar color. And you can thank Martin in the back for hounding me to get that added. I kept pushing and saying, no, I'm not going to do it, but finally did it. All right, so that's just a little bit there. Everything else is pretty much the same that you're used to if you've used really any of the other ones, especially iOS. All right, so I'm going to get to the desktop. You have that over here. All right, so during my session, I showed a couple of the projects, and they were primarily focused to demonstrate how you can have the same project on multiple platforms if you think ahead a little bit. So I just wanted to show a little bit about what these look like in more detail. And I'm going to start with Mastodon 1. So let's just open up Mastodon for Android here. Where's your dock? There's your dock.
All the way over.
Yeah, there it is. All right, so and all of this is going to look very familiar because clearly the idea here is that working with Android isn't any different than what you're used to. So you shouldn't see too much that looks drastically different, even from a code perspective. But here you can see the Android layout, and you can see this one has different theme colors selected. This has the blue instead of the default green, which isn't quite the Xojo green, but close enough. Got a field, a couple fields, a button. And this is pulling down the posts on a Mastodon server, in this case, hachyderm.io, which is the one I'm a member of. And then it just displays them in the HTML viewer. So if you look at this sort of thing, let's go with the, sorry, I gotta get used to using one of these spiffy new Macs. All right. You can see, I mean, there's nothing unusual with this particular code here. This is standard code you've all probably written if you've ever used a URL connection before. Nothing too unusual there. And then even when you look at the actual subclass that is created here, again, this looks just like everything else you've ever worked with. This is a URL connection subclass. It has an event definition to replace, to be called up here that gets the JSON that we receive, and there is just a some string manipulation here to build the URL, filling in the values that are passed in as parameters from the field, and then the send command is sent, and then eventually that we'll call content received. And same sort of code you're going to do. It's getting the content, throwing it in a JSON item, and then fetching out of that rather complicated and messy JSON the little bit I want to display. And then it calls the event definition back with the results. And then that ends up coming here and just tells the HTML viewer to load the result HTML into the screen. So you can see and you can watch what it's doing here with the debugger bridge. Needs to do all the communication. The slowest part, unfortunately, remains. We don't really have a good way to optimize this yet, is this building the symbol table part that you see. Android apps are not designed to provide a symbol table up front, so we kind of have to build it. The way their debuggers are designed is for you to just request symbols as needed. But Xojo isn't designed to work that way, so there's a little bit of a mismatch we had to work through. And I actually need to show this somewhere, don't I? Where is it? Here it is. All right, so here we go. We've got the Android emulator. You used to be able, whoops, this is very sensitive. Come back, there we go. You used to be able to resize this. Is that still true? Ooh. And you can see here that it has the HTML viewer with the results. I can click and scroll it, and it works like anything else that you might expect. So not a lot too different there. But that is demonstrating some of the common features, hopefully, that you're all using in your apps, taking advantage of subclassing and the event capabilities and making nice, reusable code, right? Everybody's doing that? I'll be grading after. All right, let's look at another one here. Let's jump ahead to the card drawing one. Save the database one for last. So here I left this with the default theme. It just has a button. This is a canvas. And then this is just a label. So it's a pretty simple layout in general. And you can see, looking at the code for this, pretty standard stuff. Let's look at the button code first. Well, actually, there's probably an opening code here that's creating a new card deck. That's the class down there. And then updating the label to say how many cards remain. And then each time you press the button, it picks a new card and stores it in this last card property, updates the label, and then tells the canvas to refresh. And then the canvas draws, as it should do. So here you can see it's telling the card to draw itself, passing in the graphics object so that it can draw to it. And that is all pretty standard technique you would use on any project, really, desktop or iOS or web. And you can see here, as I briefly showed in my session earlier, this particular class is designed to work on all four, there's four now, all four of those platforms. So it has a double draw method sitting here, an overloaded draw method. Oh, yeah, I guess it's overloaded because it's different parameters. But you can see here the code. This is the code here that is fetching card information and then figuring out how to draw the suit. And that's just, these are a bunch of graphics paths that draw it. I found this cool routine on the internets that draws playing card suits using graphics path, which, if you're not all aware, graphics path is kind of a standard way to draw these sort of curves, Bezier curves and things. So if you find just generic code that's out there, it often works without much modification in a Xojo app, also on web and things like that. So pretty handy. So it just draws everything here and then draws it onto the canvas as graphics, and then returns it back. And then that's what allows it to end up drawing up here. Now the reason for the two, I'll just point out here that it's not really Android specific, is that web apps don't have graphics path. So I was like, oh no, my bright idea for an example project for XDC is a failure. Whoa, I was quite upset at first. But then I said, no, this is a teaching opportunity. So I decided I'll just use Unicode. Boom, problem solved. Because of course, Unicode has a character for everything. I was at the British Museum last weekend, and there probably were Unicode characters for the Egyptian hieroglyphics I saw carved into tablets. But anyway, they have Unicode characters for playing card suits. So I could just use those instead and just draw those as text directly on the web graphics object that I get in instead. And so that's what I do. And that takes advantage, I'll point out here again, just because it might be a little clearer on this screen, the compatibility flags that are on the advanced tab of the inspector. So if you don't often do this sort of thing when you're building libraries or classes or whatnot to share across project types, this is where you can do that sort of thing, where I'm now saying, all right, this particular method is only to be available on web and console projects. Whereas the other one that does have graphics path available to me is available on desktop, iOS, and Android. And I probably should have unchecked those. And I guess my point when I'll be showing these is just that there's not a lot new you're going to have to learn when you're doing Android stuff. You just need to make sure you got an Android device and start playing around. And I just want to take a quick peek at the library here and highlight anything that I think might be relevant. But again, this stuff is very much the same as iOS. Now you can see the controls that are here. There's nothing really different there. Probably the biggest difference is on the date time picker, Android is missing something. It doesn't have the combined date and time picker that iOS does. You have a date picker or you have a time picker. So that's one difference between iOS and Android. Otherwise, the other notable difference is the tab panel here is an actual control on Android, whereas on iOS, you kind of have to set up your layouts a bit differently using, and select a little tab thing and put your different views on the tabs. It's a little different. Here, you just add a tab panel to the layout, and then you set each tab with a container that you want shown when the tab is selected. So it's a little simpler. Everything else here is pretty much the same. The table is different. The table here is quite a bit simpler than the current one that's in iOS. It's probably more equivalent to the iOS table, or to the table that shipped with the original version of iOS. It just has a single column, a bunch of rows, a main row of text, and then a smaller detailed row of text below it. And that's pretty much it at this point. But we do have plans to beef that up a little bit and come up with a shared table that works the same on both iOS and Android. And that's it. Everything else there works the same. All right. Take a look at the database project. And of course, who doesn't love databases, right? So this particular project is using the Eddie's Electronics SQLite database that we use in so many samples. And here I'm using a build step to load it into the Android app itself so that it'll be available when it's installed wherever it gets run. There is one little difference here in that you'll notice the copy step is happening before the build rather than after, as it would be on iOS. And that is because of the way Android stuff is built. It actually has to be in place before the build. Go figure. You can't add it after the fact. You just can't do it. So right now, it's the copy step is here. If you did try to do it after, you'd get a nice message that says, hey, this is Android. You can't do it that way. This is a simple app that just from that database is going to fetch all the customers, and then it also just fetches all the tables from the database. There's two classes here. One is, what do I got here? This one here, and then I've got this one here. Ah, yes. So the DBORM class is just accessing the information, and then I've got the class table that contains all the, essentially this is the table, and these are all the columns on the table, and I'll just create an array of that. So if we ask for the tables, I'm just calling the tables method on the SQLite database, or technically database class, and fetching it, iterating through it, and sticking an array, and then returning that. And then for customers, a similar thing, just constructing the SQL statement, throwing a row set, and then iterating through it, populating an instance of the customer with all the values that came in, and then adding that to an array, and then returning that. So if you look at the code that's up here, you can see the customer button is doing, again, very similar stuff. We are calling the database ORM that we've set up, calling its method to get back the array, and then just throwing it in the list. And the same thing with the table thing. It just calls the database connection, so to speak, and throws it all up into the tables list. And I can run this real quick. Get a click and drag on the emulator. It's a little tricky. So you can see all that stuff's there. The table, there's only a few tables in that particular database. That comes back pretty quickly. So you can see that all, again, works how everything should work and what you've hopefully been doing in the past if you work with database stuff. Are there any questions on particular things people might want me to bring up here and show, or just in general for how things are worked that they got on their mind and wondering how we handle that? Yeah, Jim in the back.
I noticed the control locking is more like the desktop locking.
Oh, yes.
Could you talk about is the future of iOS going to go to this? Or?
All right, so control locking, yeah, I can mention that. Jim is asking about, he noticed here, and I glossed over it, there's a big locking thing here for the Android controls that you may have seen on desktop and web projects, whereas iOS uses constraints to manage the control stuff. And yes, we are going to be at some point moving iOS over to use locking. Constraints will remain as available on iOS if you need it, but primarily we want to get all the platforms using locking in a similar way to make things, again, more consistent there. And I think someone asked me in my session regarding the table differences between iOS and Android. And I said that getting a shared one was kind of a requirement before we can get a shared project, a shared mobile project type. Getting the locking on iOS is another one of those requirements we need so that we can get to a shared project type. So you'll probably start to see those things roll out. And as more of those roll out, you'll be like, ooh, maybe they're getting closer to what I want. So you can pay attention to that stuff. Yes, Jost.
What about, it's now shown in book that that's actually standard, but what about when you turn your phone into landscape?
Yeah, when you turn your phone into landscape. Well, if I knew how to use a trackpad, it wouldn't have done that. Yeah, the landscape switching was just added like in the last couple of weeks. It definitely did not reapply the locking, so that looks like a bug. But it does flip the layout so you can see what it would look like landscape and make your layouts that way. And you can also tag the windows with the orientation. If you don't want it to be going landscape or you want to keep it one way, you can set that so that if you haven't done the work to make sure your UI is going to look good in one or the other, you can prevent it from looking bad.
Does it support container controls?
The question from Bob is, do we have support for container controls in Android? Yes, yeah, we have support for container controls.
If so, you could simply have one container control in portrait and the other in landscape, and when they flip it, you flip the container.
Right, yeah, Bob's suggestion is a common one. If you have different layouts you want to see, often you might design different containers with those layouts and then choose to show the one that's appropriate for what you need.
Then I need an event firing when I turn my phone.
As Joe says, yes, there are events that are fired when the orientation changes. Yeah. All right, well, Travis and I are going to be around the next couple of days, I think. So if you have questions after today and you want to track us down, we'll definitely be around to show stuff on our laptops or whatever. Yeah, Bob, one more?
Where can I get the latest version of the Android test?
Where can you get the latest version of the Android test build? The latest version of the Android test build is in the testers forum, the Android sub forum of the testers forum.
Okay.
So you can go there. That build will technically expire Thursday, so grab it now while it's hot. Yes, Jeremy.
Is there any planned support in-app purchases in Android? Because currently, if I put in time to make an app and I can't set it, there's no point in working on Android.
Right, right. So Jeremy is a French capitalist at heart and is wanting to know where his money's is. He wants to be able to sell things in the App Store, so he wants in-app purchase support. We do not have, as you know, on the mobile framework for iOS either, any in-app purchase support. There also is nothing for Android for that matter. I do not know if that's accessible via declares.
Yeah, in fact, I mentioned that as an example. In the external library declares, you can declare to the Play Store billing library, which lets you do that.
So I'm sure, Travis says there is a library for that, and I'm certain he will have an example project that ships with Xojo available by the time we get to shipping.
Did I actually hear the same words from Travis?
We'll figure it out together, Jeremy.
Just keep hounding him.
Very good.
Anything else? All right, well, like I said, don't hesitate to bug us if, yeah, Tobias.
Maybe as we are coming back to declares now, the new ways for declares with the object declares certainly have an easy process. But what happens to the idea of the interrupts? I know these were planned for iOS first, but then they vanished from the roadmap.
Yes, so Tobias is sneaking in a question about interrupts while we're demonstrating Android, but it's a reasonable question, as we did talk about that in the past. Interrupts are no longer on the roadmap. We've kind of set those aside for a bit. We're trying to figure out, and I think we've got plans in place for just easier creation of declares rather than attempting to pre-build everything using interrupts, which what that was. That was the sort of thing where like, yeah, we can get 80% there, but the last 20% was going to take another 200%. And it didn't look like it's going to work out. I mean, we still have that sitting around, but I think easier declare creation is probably more the direction you're looking at. All right, thanks everyone.